The Chevrolet Corvette is a two-door, two-passenger luxury sports car manufactured and marketed by Chevrolet since 1953, with 8 design generations, noted sequentially from C1 to C8. The Corvette is noted for its performance and distinctive fiberglass or composite panels. It was front-engine through 2019 and mid-engine since. The Corvette is currently the only two-seat sports car produced by a major United States auto manufacturer, and it serves as Chevrolet's halo vehicle. In 1953, GM executives accepted a suggestion by Myron Scott, then the assistant director of the Public Relations Department, to name the company's new sports car after the Corvette, a small maneuverable warship. The first model, a convertible, was introduced at the 1953 GM Motorama as a concept car. Production models went on sale later that year. In 1963, the second generation was introduced in a coupe and convertible styles. Originally manufactured in Flint, Michigan, and St. Louis, Missouri, the Corvette has been produced in Bowling Green, Kentucky, since 1981, which is also the location of the National Corvette Museum. The Corvette has become widely known as America's sports car. Automotive News wrote that after being featured in the early 1960s television show Route 66, the Corvette became synonymous with freedom and adventure, ultimately becoming both the most successful concept car in history and the most popular sports car in history. The first generation of Corvette was introduced late in the 1953 model year. It first appeared as a show car for the 1953 General Motors Motorama, held January 17, 1823 at New York's Waldorf Astoria Hotel. At the time, Chevrolet General Manager Thomas H. Keating said it was 6 months to a year away from production readiness. The car generated enough interest to commence mass production on June 30, 1953. Unique to Corvette was its hand-laid-up fiberglass body. This generation was often referred to as the solid axle models, with independent rear suspension appearing in the next. 300 hand-built Corvette convertibles were produced, all polo white, for the 1953 model year. The 1954 model year vehicles could be ordered in pennant blue, sportsman red, black, or polo white. 3,640 were built and sold slowly. 1953, 1954, and 1955 model years were the only Corvettes equipped with the 235 cubic inches, 3.9 liters, version of the second-generation Blue Flame inline-six rated at 150 horsepower, 112 kilowatts, 152 PS. The 1955 model offered a 265 cubic inches, 4.34 liters, V8 engine as an option. Despite the poor sales of the Corvette at the time, the brand-new V8 was an overwhelmingly popular option. Only 6 of the 1955 models were produced with the inline-six. With a large inventory of unsold 1954 models, GM limited production to 700 for 1955. With the new V8, the 0-60 miles per hour time improved by 1.5 seconds, and saw 3 new competitors called the Ford Thunderbird and the Studebaker Speedster were introduced that same year, and the larger Chrysler C300. A new body was introduced for the 1956 model featuring a new face and side coves. The tail lamp fins were also gone. An optional ramjet fuel injection system was made available in the middle of the 1957 model year. It was one of the first American mass-produced engines in history to reach 1 horsepower. 0.75 kilowatts per cubic inch, 16.4 cubic centimeters, and Chevrolet's advertising agency used the 1 HP per cubic inch slogan for advertising the 283 horsepower, 211 kilowatts, 283 cubic inches, 4.64 liters, small block engine. Other options included power windows, 1956, hydraulic alloy-assisted convertible top, 1956, heavy-duty brakes and suspension, 1957, and 4-speed manual transmission. Late 1957, Delco radio transistorized signal-seeking hybrid car radio, which used both vacuum tubes and transistors in its radio circuitry. 1956 option. The 1958 Corvette received a body and interior freshening which included a longer front end with quad headlamps, bumper exiting exhaust tips, a new steering wheel, and a dashboard with all gauges mounted directly in front of the driver. For 1958 only were 1958 hood louvers and twin trunk spears. The 1959 A60 model years had few changes except a decreased amount of body chrome and more powerful engine offerings. 3. In 1961, the rear of the car was completely redesigned with the addition of a ducktail with 4 round lights. The light treatment would continue for all following model year Corvettes until 2014. In 1962, the Chevrolet 283 cubic inches, 4.64 liters, small block was enlarged to 327 cubic inches, 5.36 liters. In standard form, it was rated at 250 horsepower. 190 kilowatts for an extra 12% over the list price. The fuel-injected version produced 360 horsepower, 270 kilowatts, making it the fastest of the C1 generation. 1962 was also the last year for the wraparound windshield, solid rear axle, and convertible only body style. The trunk lid and exposed headlamps did not reappear for many decades. The second generation, C2, Corvette, which introduced Stingray to the model, continued with fiberglass body panels, and overall, was smaller than the first generation. The C2 was later referred to as mid-years. The car was designed by Larry Shinoda with major inspiration from a previous concept design called the Q Corvette, which was created by Peter Brock and Chuck Pullman under the styling direction of Bill Mitchell. Earlier, Mitchell had sponsored a car known as the Mitchell Stingray in 1959 because Chevrolet no longer participated in factory racing. This vehicle had the largest effect on the styling of this generation, although it had no top and did not give away what the final version of the C2 would look like. The third inspiration was a Mako shark Mitchell had caught while deep-sea fishing. Production started for the 1963 model year and ended in 1967, introducing a new game, Stingray. The 1963 model was the first year for a Corvette Kuwait copyright and it featured a distinctive tapering rear deck, a feature that later reappeared on the 1971 Bowtail Buick Riviera, with, for 1963 only, a split rear window. The Stingray featured hidden headlamps, non-functional hood vents, and an independent rear suspension. Corvette chief engineer Zora Argostantov never liked the split rear window because it blocked rear vision, but Mitchell thought it to be a key part of the entire design. Maximum power for 1963 was 360 horsepower, 270 kilowatts, and was raised to 375 horsepower, 280 kilowatts, in 1964. Options included electronic ignition, the breakerless magnetic pulse-triggered Delcatronic first offered on some 1963 Pontiac models. On 1964 models the decorative hood vents were eliminated and Dontov, the Corvette's chief engineer, got his way with the split rear window changed to a full-width window. Four-wheel disc brakes were introduced in 1965, as was a big block engine option. The 396 cubic inches, 6.49 liters, V8 side exhaust pipes were also optionally available in 1965, and continued to be offered through 1967. The introduction of the 425 horsepower, 317 kilowatts 396 cubic inches, 6.49 liters, big block in 1965 spelled the beginning of the end for the Rochester fuel injection system. The 396 cubic inches, 6.49 liters, option cost $292.70 while the fuel-injected 327 cubic inches, 5.36 liters, engine cost $538. Few could justify spending $245 more for 50 horsepower, 37 kilowatts, less, even though Fi could deliver over 20 miles per gallon on the highway and would keep delivering fuel despite high G loading in corners taken at racing speeds. Another 1963 and 1964 option was the Z06 competition package, which offered stiffer suspension, bigger, multi-segment line brakes with fin drums, and more. Only a couple hundred coupes and a single convertible were factory-equipped this way in 1963, with only 771 fuel-injected cars built in 1965. Chevrolet discontinued the option at the end of the 1965 production, having introduced a less expensive big block 396 engine rated at 425 horsepower in the middle of the production year and selling over 2,000 in just a few months. In 1966, Chevrolet introduced an even larger 427 cubic inches, 7.00 liters, big block version. Other options available on the C2 included the Wonderbar auto-tuning, AM radio, AM/FM radio, mid-1963, air conditioning, late 1963, a telescopic steering wheel, 1965, and headrests. 1966, the Stingray's independent rear suspension was successfully adapted for the new 1965 Chevrolet Corvair, which solved the quirky handling problems of that unique rear-engine compact. 1967 was the final model year for the second generation. The 1967 model featured restyled fender vents, less ornamentation, and backup lamps, which were on the inboard in 1966. Were now rectangular and centrally located. The first use of all-four taillights in red started in 1961 and was continued through the C2 lineup except for 1966. This feature returned for the 1967 model year and then continued on all Corvettes since. The 1967 model year had the first L88 engine option that was rated at 430 horsepower, 320 kilowatts. But unofficial estimates place the output at 560 horsepower, 420 kilowatts, or more. Only 20 such engines were installed at the factory. From 1967 through 1969, the Holley triple two-barrel carburetor, or tri-power, was available on the 427 L89, a $368 option, on top of the cost for the high-performance 427. Despite these changes, sales slipped more than 15%, to 22,940, 8,504 coupes, off close to 15%, and 14,436 convertibles, down nearly 19%. Dantov came up with a lightweight version of the C2 in 1962. Concerned about Ford and what they were doing with the Shelby Cobra, GM planned to manufacture 100 Grand Sport Corvettes, but only 5 were built. They were driven by historic drivers such as Roger Penske, A. J. Foyt, Jim Hull, and Dick Goldstrand among others. Today the 5 cars, 001-005, are all held by private owners and are among the most coveted and valuable Corvettes ever built. 002 is exhibited in the Simeon Foundation Automotive Museum and is in running condition. The third-generation Corvette, patterned after the Mach-O Shark II concept car, was introduced for the 1968 model year and was in production until 1982. C3 coupes featured the first use of T-top removable roof panels. It introduced monikers that were later revived, such as LT1, ZR1, Z07, and Collector Edition. In 1978, Corvette's 25th anniversary was celebrated with the two-tone Silver Anniversary Edition and an Indy Pace Car replica edition of the C3. This was also the first time that a Corvette was used as a pace car for the Indianapolis 500. Engines and chassis components were mostly carried over from the C2, but the body and interior were new. The 350 cubic inches, 5.7 liters, engine replaced the old 327 cubic inches, 5.36 liters, as the base engine in 1969, but power remained at 300 horsepower, 224 kilowatts. 1969 was the only year for a C3 to optionally offer either a factory-installed side exhaust or a normal rear exit with chrome tips. The all-aluminum ZL1 engine was also new for 1969. The special big block engine was listed at 430 horsepower, 321 kilowatts, but was reported to produce 560 horsepower, 420 kilowatts, and propelled a ZL1 through the 1/4 mile in 10.89 seconds. There was an extended production run for the 1969 model year due to a lengthy labor strike, which meant sales were down on the 1970 models, to 17,316. 1970 small block power peaked with the optional high compression, high revving LT1 that produced 370 horsepower, 276 kilowatts. The 427 big blocks were enlarged to 454 cubic inches, 7.44 liters, with a 390 horsepower, 291 kilowatts rating. The ZR1 special package was an option available in the 1970 through 1972 model years and included the LT1 engine combined with special racing equipment. Only 53 ZR1s were built in 1971, to accommodate regular low-lead fuel with lower anti-knock properties. The engine compression ratios were lowered, which resulted in reduced power ratings. The power rating for the 350 cubic inches, 5.7 liters, L48 base engine decreased from 300 to 270 horsepower, and the optional special high-performance LT1 engine decreased from 370 to 330 horsepower. The LS5 454 cubic inches, 7.4 liters, motor was carried over and produced 365 horsepower, 272 kilowatts. Offered in A71 only was the LS6 454 cubic inches, 7.4 liters, big block featuring aluminum heads and delivering 425 horsepower, 317 kilowatts, the highest of the 1970 to 1972 series, and could be ordered with an automatic transmission. For the 1972 model year, GM moved to the C-net measurement, which resulted in further reduced, but more realistic, power ratings than the previous C-gross standard. Although the 1972 model's 350 cubic inches, 5.7 liters, horsepower was the same as that for the 1971 model year, the lower net horsepower numbers were used instead of gross horsepower. The L48 base engine was now rated at 200 horsepower, 150 kilowatts, and the optional LT1 engine was now rated at 270 horsepower, 200 kilowatts. 1974 models had the last true dual exhaust system that was dropped on the 1975 models with the introduction of catalytic converters requiring the use of no-lead fuel. Engine power decreased with the Bass ZQ3 engine producing 165 horsepower, 123 kilowatts. The optional L82's output 205 horsepower, 153 kilowatts, while the 454 big block engine was discontinued. Gradual power increases after 1975 peaked in 1980 with the model's optional L82 producing 230 horsepower, 172 kilowatts, in its final year. 1981 saw a single engine, the L81, which had 190 horsepower, 142 kilowatts, while the fuel-injected 1982 L83 had 200 horsepower, 149 kilowatts. Styling changed subtly throughout the generation until 1978 for the car's 25th anniversary. The Stingray nameplate was not used on the 1968 model, but Chevrolet still referred to the Corvette as a Stingray. However, 1969 through 1976, models used the Stingray name as one word, without the space. In 1970, the body design was updated, including fender flares, and interiors were refined, including redesigned seats and indication lights near the gear shift that were an early use of fiber optics. Because of government regulation, the 1973 Corvette's chrome front bumper was changed to a 5 mph, 8 km/h, system with the urethane bumper cover. 1973 Corvettes are unique in that sense, as they are the only year when the front bumper was polyurethane and the rear retained the chrome two-piece bumper set. 1973 was also the last year chrome bumpers were used. The optional wire spoke wheel covers, left, were offered for the last time in 1973. Only 45 Z07 were built in 1973. From 1974 onwards both the front and rear bumpers were polyurethane. In 1974, a 5 mph, 8 km/h, rear bumper system with a two-piece, tapering urethane bumper cover replaced the camtail and chrome bumper blades and matched the new front design from the previous year. The 1975 model year ended the convertible body style until it returned 11 years later, and Dave McClellan succeeded Zora Argostontov as the Corvette's chief engineer. For the 1976 models, the fiberglass floor was replaced with steel panels to protect from the catalytic converter's high operating temperature. For 15 model years the names Corvette, Stingray, and Stingray were synonymous. 1977 was the last year the tunnel roof treatment with a vertical back window was used. In addition, leather seats were available at no additional cost for the first time. The black exterior color returned after a 6-year absence. The 1978 25th anniversary model introduced the fastback glass rear window and featured a new interior and dashboard. Corvette's 25th anniversary was celebrated with the Indy 500 Pace Car Limited Edition and a silver anniversary model featuring silver over gray lower body paint. All 1979 models featured the previous year's pace car seats and offered the front and rear spoilers as optional equipment. 53,807 were produced for the model year, making 1979 the peak production year for all versions of the Corvette. Sales have trended downward since then. In 1980, the Corvette received an integrated aerodynamic redesign that resulted in a significant reduction in drag. After several years of weight increases, in 1980 Corvettes were lighter as engineers trimmed both body and chassis weight. In mid-1981, production relocated from St. Louis to Bowling Green, Kentucky, where all subsequent Corvette generations have since been manufactured, and several two-tone paint options were offered. The 1981 models were the last available with a manual transmission until well into the 1984 production run. In 1982, a fuel-injected engine returned, and a final C3 Tribute Collector's Edition featured an exclusive, opening rear window hatch. The fourth-generation Corvette was the first complete redesign of the Corvette since 1963. Production was to begin for the 1983 model year, but quality issues and part delays resulted in only 43 prototypes for the 1983 model year produced that were never sold. All of the 1983 prototypes were destroyed or serialized as 1984 model year except one with the white exterior, medium blue interior, L83 356 205 horsepower V8, and 4-speed automatic transmission. After extensive testing and modifications were completed, it was initially retired as a display sitting on an external wall over the Bowling Green assembly plant's employee entrance. Later this only surviving 1983 prototype was removed, restored, and is now on display at the National Corvette Museum in Bowling Green, Kentucky. It is still owned by GM. On February 12, 2014, it was nearly lost to a sinkhole that opened up under the museum. 8 other Corvettes were severely damaged. Regular fourth-generation production began on January 3, 1983. The 1984 model year and delivery to customers began in March 1983. The 1984 model carried over the 350 cubic inches, 5.7 liters, L83's slightly more powerful, 5 horsepower, Crossfire V8 engine from the final 1982 third-generation model. New chassis features were aluminum brake calipers and an all-aluminum suspension for weight savings and rigidity. The new one-piece target top had no center reinforcement. Retractable headlights continued to be used, but they were now single units, which were last used in 1957. A new electronic dashboard with digital liquid crystal displays for the speedometer and tachometer was standard. Beginning in 1985, the 230 horsepower, 170 kilowatts, L98 engine with tune-port fuel injection became the standard engine. September 1984 through 1988 Corvettes were available with a 4+3 transmission designed by Doug Nash. a 4-speed manual coupled to an automatic overdrive and the top 3 gears. It was devised to help the Corvette meet U.S. fuel economy standards. Since 1981, when it was last offered, a manual transmission returned to the Corvette starting with production in late 1984. The transmission proved to be problematic and was replaced by a modern ZF 6-speed manual transmission in 1989. In 1986, the second Corvette Indy pace car was released. It was the first convertible Corvette since 1975, a center high-mounted signal light, CHMSL, a third center brake light was added in 1986 to comply with safety regulations, while the color of the pace car used in the race was yellow. All 1986 convertibles also had an Indy 500 emblem mounted on the console, making any color a pace car edition. In 1987, the B2K twin-turbo option became available from the factory. The Callaway Corvette was a regular production option, RPO B2K. The B2K option coexisted in 1990 and 1991 with the ZR1 option, which then replaced it. Early B2Ks produced 345 horsepower, 257 kilowatts, and 450 pounds-feet, 610 Nm. Later versions boasted 450 horsepower, 336 kilowatts, and 613 pounds-feet, 831 Nm. 1988 saw the 35th anniversary edition of the Corvette. Each of these featured a special badge with an identification number mounted next to the gear selector and was finished with a white exterior, wheels, and interior. In 1990, the ZR1 option Corvette was introduced with the LT5 engine designed by Lotus and built in the Mercury Marine plant in Stillwater, Oklahoma. The LT5 engine was a 4-cam, DOG, design producing 375 horsepower, 280 kilowatts, when at open throttle. The C4 ZR1 ran from 1990 through 1995 model years. In 1991, all Corvettes received updates to the body, interior, and wheels. The convex rear fascia that set the 1990 ZR1 apart from the base model was now included on L98 Corvettes, making the styling of the expensive ZR1 even closer to that of the Bass cars. The most obvious difference remaining between the base and ZR1 models besides the wider rear wheels was the location of the CHMSL, which was integrated into the new rear fascia used on the base model but remained at the top of the rear hatch on the ZR1s. For the 1992 model year, the 300 horsepower, 220 kilowatts, LT1 engine was introduced, an increase of 50 horsepower, 37 kilowatts, over 1,991's L98 engine. This engine featured reverse flow cooling. The heads were cooled before the block, which allowed for a higher compression ratio of 10.5:1. A new distributor was also debuted, called Optus Park. That distributor was driven directly off the front of the camshafter and mounted in front of the timing cover, just above the crankshaft and harmonic balancer. Also new for 1992 was acceleration slip regulation, ASR, a form of traction control that utilized the Corvette's brakes, spark retard, and throttle close down to prevent excessive rear wheel spin and possible loss of control. The traction control device could be switched off if desired. A special 40th anniversary edition was released in 1993, which featured a commemorative ruby red color, 40th anniversary badges, and embroidered seat backs. The 1993 Corvette also marked the introduction of the passive keyless entry system, making it the first GM car to feature it. Production of the ZR1 ended in 1995 after 6,939 cars had been built. 1996 was the final year of C4 production and featured special models and options, including the Grand Sport and Collector Edition, OBD2, onboard diagnostics, run-flat tires, and the LT4 engine. The 330 horsepower, 246 kilowatts, LT4 V8 was available only with a manual transmission, while all 300 horsepower, 224 kilowatts, LT1 Corvettes used automatic transmissions. Chevrolet released the Grand Sport, GS, version in 1996 to mark the end of production of the C4 Corvette. The Grand Sport moniker was a nod to the original Grand Sport model produced in 1963. A total of 1,000 GS Corvettes were produced, 810 as coupes and 190 as convertibles. The 1996 GS came with a high-performance LT4 V8, producing 330 horsepower, 246 kilowatts, and 340 pounds-feet, 460 Nm. The Grand Sport came only in Admiral Blue with a white stripe down the middle, black wheels, and 2 red stripes on the front left wheel arch. The C5 Corvette was redesigned from the ground up after sales from the previous generation began to decline. Production of the C5 Corvette began in 1996, but quality, manufacturing issues saw its release to the public en masse delayed until 1997 and continuing through the 2004 model year. The C5 was a completely new design that featured many new concepts and manufacturing breakthroughs that would be carried forward to the C6 C7. It had a top speed of 176 miles per hour, 283 kilometers per hour, and was judged by the automotive press as a breakthrough with vastly improved dynamics in nearly every area over the previous C4 design. Innovations included a 0.29 drag coefficient, near 50-50 weight distribution, and active handling, the first stability control for a Corvette. It also weighed less than the C4. It was the first time the platform was a badge engineered as the Cadillac XLR with limited sales. An all-new LS1 aluminum engine, Gen 3's small block, featured individual ignition coils for each cylinder, and aluminum block and pistons. It was initially rated at 345 horsepower, 257 kilowatts, and 350 pounds-feet, 470 Nm, but was increased to 350 horsepower, 260 kilowatts, in the 2001 edition. The new engine, combined with the new body, was able to achieve up to 28 miles per gallon on the highway. For its first year, the C5 was available only as a coupe, although the new platform was designed from the ground up to be a convertible, which returned in 1998, followed by the fixed-roof coupe, FRC, in 1999. One concept for the FRC was for it to be a stripped-down model with the possible V6 engine, nicknamed in-house as the Billy Bob. By 2000, FRC plans laid the groundwork for the return in 2001 of the Z06, an RPO option not seen since Zora's 1963 race-ready Corvette. The Z06 model replaced the FRC model as the highest-performance C5 Corvette. Instead of a heavier double-overhead cam engine like the ZR1 of the C4 generation, the Z06 used an LS6, a 385 horsepower, 287 kilowatts, derivative of the standard LS1 engine. Using the much more rigid fixed-roof design allowed the Z06 unprecedented handling thanks to upgraded brakes and less body flex. Those characteristics, along with the use of materials such as a titanium exhaust system and a carbon fiber hood in the 2004 model year, led to further weight savings and performance gains for the C5 Z06. The LS6 was later upgraded to 405 horsepower, 302 kilowatts, for 2002-2004. Although the Z06's rated power output is equal to that of the C4 ZR1, the improved rigidity, suspension, brakes, and reduced weight of the C5 produced a car quicker than C4 ZR1. For the C6 Corvette, GM wanted to focus more on refining the C5 than trying to redesign it. Car Driver and Motor Trend described the C6 as an evolution of the C5, instead of a complete redo. The C6 wheelbase was increased while body overhangs were decreased when compared to the C5. Retractable headlights were replaced with fixed units, making this the first model since 1962 to be so equipped. The C6 brought a new and improved interior compared to the C5. As a result of the upgraded interior, The C6 had a slight increase in passenger hip room. It also sported an updated LS1/LS6 engine now called the LS2. This engine was primarily an LS1/LS6 with a bump in displacement from 5.7 liters to 6.0 liters. The increased displacement of the 6.0 bumped the LS2's horsepower up by 50 horsepower over its LS1 progenitor, although still 5 horsepower less than the upgraded LS6 engine found in the previous C5Z06. Thus the LS2 was now at 364 cubic inches, and it produced 400 horsepower, 300 kilowatts, at 6,000 revolutions per minute and 400 pounds-to-feet, 540 Nm, at 4,400 revolutions per minute, giving the vehicle a 0-60 miles per hour. 97 kilometers per hour, time of under 4.2 seconds. Its top speed was 190 miles per hour, 310 kilometers per hour. The C6 generation did not match the previous generation's relatively good fuel economy, despite its relatively low 0.28 drag coefficient and low curb weight, achieving 1626 miles per gallon, city/highway. Equipped with automatic or manual transmissions like all manual transmission Corvettes since 1989, it is fitted with computer-rated gear selection, CAGs, to improve fuel economy by requiring drivers to shift from first gear directly to fourth in low-speed/low throttle conditions. This feature helps the C6 avoid the gas guzzler tax by achieving better fuel economy. The new Z06 arrived as a 2006 model in the third quarter of 2005. It has a 7.0 liters version of the small block engine codenamed LS7, at 427.6 cubic inches. The Z06 was the largest small block ever offered by General Motors. Because of the Corvette's former use of 427 cubic inch big blocks in the late 1960s and early 1970s, the LS7's size was rounded down to 427 cubic inches. Official output was 505 horsepower, 377 kilowatts, and has a 0-60 miles per hour. 97 kilometers per hour, time of 3.7 seconds. The top speed is 198 miles per hour, 319 kilometers per hour. Another first for a Corvette, the Z06 featured a full aluminum chassis. The frame mirrored the C5/6 architecture, but substituted aluminum hydroformed rails and aluminum extrusions and castings fore and aft. This dropped weight from 419 to 287 pounds while improving chassis stiffness. For 2008, the Corvette received a mild freshening. A new LS3 engine with displacement increased to 6.2 liters, 380 cubic inches, resulting in 430 horsepower, 321 kilowatts, and 424 pounds-to-feet, 575 Nm, 436 horsepower, 325 kilowatts, and 428 pounds-to-feet, 580 Nm, afforded with the optional performance exhaust. The 6-speed manual transmission also has improved shift linkage and a 0-60 miles per hour, 97 kilometers per hour. Time of 4.0 seconds, while the automatic is set up for quicker shifts giving the C6 automatic a 0-60 miles per hour, 97 kilometers per hour. Time of 4.0 seconds, quicker than any other production automatic Corvette. The interior was slightly updated and a new 4LT leather wrap interior package was added. The wheels were also updated to a new 5-spoke design. The ZR1 was formally announced in a December 2007 press statement by General Motors, where it was revealed that their target of 100 horsepower, 75 kilowatts, per 1 liter, 61 cubic inches, had been reached by a new LS9 engine with an Eaton supercharged 6.2-liter engine producing 638 horsepower, 476 kilowatts, and 604 pounds-to-feet. 819 Nm. The LS9 engine was the most powerful to be put into a GM production sports car. Its top speed was 205 miles per hour, 330 km/h. The historical name Grand Sport returned to the Corvette line up in 2010 as an entirely new model series that replaced the Z51 option. The new model was an LS3-equipped Z06 with a steel frame instead of aluminum. It retained many of the features of the Z06, including a wide body with 18 by 9.5 and 19 by 12-inch wheels, dry sump oiling, manual transmission coupes only, 6-piston 14-inch front brakes and 4-piston rear, and improved suspension. Manual transmission equipped G/S coupe models received a tweaked LS3 with a forged crank, are built in Z06 fashion by hand, and utilize a dry sump oil system. The first 3 gears were also made shorter for better throttle response and faster acceleration. A new launch control system was introduced for all models that allow for sub-4 seconds 0-60. EPA is estimated at 26 mpg on highways, and 1.0 g on the skid pad. Beginning with the 2011 model year, buyers of the Corvette Z06 and ZR1 were offered the opportunity to assist in the build of their engines. Titled the Corvette Engine Build Experience, buyers paid extra to be flown to the Wixom, Michigan Performance Build Center. Participants helped the assembly line workers build the V8 engine, then took delivery of the car at the National Corvette Museum in Bowling Green, Key, near the Corvette final assembly point. The last C6 Corvette was manufactured in February 2013. In May 2013, a federal investigation of problems with more than 100,000 C6 lighting systems was announced.